Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin, and I am Dr. Brovkin. Today is the 24th of January 2026, and my today's program is called The Fallout from Davos Towards Putin-Trump Deal. Now, as you all know, there's lots and lots of news and discussions circulating in the media field about the significance of what has happened in Davos and then the ongoing negotiations on Ukraine. So what I try to do is put this in kind of a format of a big picture and what it actually boils down to, the major conclusions that we can draw from what happened in Davos and what it means for those that I discuss pretty much all the time in most of my videos, and that is the United States, Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. These are the four major players in this unfolding drama, and one could call it the drama of restructuring the political order in the world, and primarily in Europe. So, let's focus first on what happened in the transatlantic relationship in Davos, and then what's the fallout of Davos. Of course, we all know that the centerpiece there is Greenland, and I discussed in my previous videos, as so many others, what actually happened and the positions taken, but the aftershock, the fallout, the consequence of what happened in Davos is truly historic. And that is that for the first time in 80 years, there's a rethinking of the relationship between Europe and the United States. It has become clear to most observers and to the leaders of the European countries that the relationship have come to a breaking point. And we heard earlier statements of Chancellor Merz, but he repeated it, that the era of total reliance on the United States in security matters is over, and that one has to begin thinking about a new architecture of security relations of European countries. There's new talk about creating a European army or a NATO without the United States. There is an assertion, a very stark one, by Canadian Prime Minister, and what he called the weaponization of economic ties. Canada had been really offended in a very serious matter that is not going to go away in the claims by Trump on 51st state and all kinds of other statements that is not going to disappear. The rift and the damage has been done. Now, also von der Leyen congratulates herself on pushing through the sovereignty for Greenland under the guise of giving military bases and whatever Trump wants. This was her formula, and she can congratulate herself that that had worked. However, the damage had been done. There is a serious doubt in Europe that the United States is a reliable partner. And I think that is historic. That had never happened before, and that creates a totally new reality. Moreover, this is in the context of negotiations on Ukraine war that now excludes Europe altogether. Now, that is perhaps the most important outcome. Just before Davos, there were endless meetings between Zelensky and the European leaders, and they'd been talking about coalition of the willing, and they'd been talking about stationing European troops in Europe. Now, all of that is gone. Nobody wants to put any of their troops in Ukraine. They're not going to be backed by the United States, and Europe doesn't have the guts or the courage or the capacity to put their troops in Ukraine without the United States. So it's a rude awakening of the Europeans to the fact that they represent close to nothing in military power confronting Russia. And this is now a consequence, a fallout, as far as Europe is concerned, after Davos. Now, let's look at the situation concerning Ukraine and Zelensky, again, as a fallout from Davos. Even perhaps more dramatic than the scandal around Greenland is the performance of Zelensky at Davos. It's another sensation, one could say, because it was described by many observers as a rant, as a hysteria, as baseless accusations against Europe. But essentially, what happened was that Zelensky came out of the meeting with Trump, and it was obvious that it didn't go well. That Zelensky didn't think he was going to come to Davos, and then he came when Trump announced publicly that he wanted him there to talk to him. So he rushed to Davos, and he hoped that he would do something that he managed to do in the fall, and that is to convince Trump that Russia is the aggressor, that needs to be strengthening of sanctions and strengthening of U.S. support and new missiles and tomahawks and what else one could think of. None of the sort happened, and instead he got nothing. He got no security guarantees from the United States. He got no new missiles, no financial commitments, nothing at all. And we don't know, because it has not been reported, what exactly went on behind closed doors. We can only know that Zelensky was furious. He was very upset. And we also know right after that, that same night, the Witkoff and Kushner and others were sent to Moscow to negotiate. I'll come back to it in a minute. But as far as Zelensky is concerned, his speech was insulting to the EU leaders. He called them as weaklings. He accused them of not doing enough to stand up to Russian aggression. And he accused them of being unable to provide any meaningful assistance. He attacked Viktor Orban in ways that go beyond anything acceptable in diplomatic discourse, which made Viktor Orban furious in his response, and so forth. But the bottom line is that Zelensky is now perceived by many European leaders as ungrateful beggar. He had been begging and begging and begging, and the Europeans have been trying very hard to please him with the loan, with the weapons that they paid for through Americans. Now this is it. It's over. It's finished. Nobody in this context, after Davos, after Greenland, nobody's going to pay for Zelensky. If anything, they would think and worry more about having enough funds for strengthening their own security, their own armed forces, their own anti-defense missiles, which they cannot rely on the United States. It's a new age. And Zelensky is smart enough to realize this. And that is why he was so upset. Now we move on to the meaning of what happened for Russia. Now, there's bad and good from the Russian point of view. The bad thing, of course, is that Putin's one more attempt to offer an olive branch to the Europeans has been rejected. He talked about, and I talked in my video before last, that he tried to create an offer to the Europeans, an architecture, as he put it, of new security guarantees for all European nations, including Russia, including Ukraine. This is what he offered. This was a chance, one more chance that the Europeans missed to take Putin at his word and to provide guarantees that he's not going to attack European nations, that the borders would be guaranteed in security for all. No, they ignored it. They completely ignored it. Instead, they focused on the war in Ukraine. This was again and again repeated as if this is something that the Europeans need to unify them. They need a Feindbild, as it is in German, image of an enemy in order to stay united. So this is the bad part for the Russians. Now the good part for the Russians is a kind of a rapprochement, a new rapprochement, one could say, with the United States and with Trump, which was demonstrated for all to see that same day a delegation led by Witkoff and Kushner sped off to Moscow, arriving there at midnight and holding negotiations with Putin at that same day. In other words, through the night, and they finished close to 4 a.m. in the morning. What does that say? It says that there's some kind of urgency in this. It seems like this is not empty talk that could have been postponed until the next day and then have a dinner and have a lunch and reception and photo ops. No, they talked for 4 hours and then they sped off to Abu Dhabi for a new round of talks. So the conclusion one can draw is that the Europeans reject the initiatives and Trump picks it up. Trump picks it up, and there is serious negotiations going on behind closed doors, of course, over the settlement in Ukraine and also on other things. So let me go to those, Putin and Trump. Now, as I say, we don't know what exactly is being decided in Abu Dhabi. It's too early to say. But what I could say from what I know and from what I hear is that this is a preparation of a deal or a roadmap to a settlement in Ukraine. To tell you frankly, my dear listeners and subscribers, I didn't think that that would happen. I was very skeptical because I think the Russians have had enough of Zelensky, and they certainly pretty much detest Budanov, and Budanov is listed as a terrorist and a person that would be put on trial, and nevertheless they're negotiating with him. Now, this is very interesting because that means that that Putin has decided that at this point it doesn't matter. What matters is move ahead with the dealings with President Trump in order to achieve a breakthrough. So this is more important than who represents Ukraine. Trump knows Russian position, that Zelensky is unelected and stays in power and has no legitimacy. Trump also knows that Budanov is the persona non grata in Russia. And nevertheless, the Russians said, we're ready to negotiate. And that is why it is so important, because then they're negotiating not with Ukrainians, they're negotiating with Americans. And this is why the American generals are there, and the deputy chief of general staff of the Russian army is there, and they're working out details, and therefore there's all reason to believe that some very serious negotiations about the future of Ukraine are going on, and let me stress it, without Europe. One could even make a case that this whole affair of Greenland, sort of attack on Europe and then step back, perhaps was initiated in order to cut the Europeans off from the Ukraine negotiations. Because before that, they were so active and they were adding points and deducting points from the 28 point and 20 point. Then they want 800,000 Ukrainian army. Then they want 600,000 Ukrainian army. Then they want to station their troops. They want American backing. Now all of that is gone. It's just gone. They're no longer a party to negotiations, even though Trump says that they should be, that they will be, but they're not at the moment. So this suggests that all indications are that there is some deal being prepared. When one more word on Putin and his support for the so-called Board of Peace, which the Europeans don't want to have anything to do with. They rejected it and they don't want to join. And Trump invited Putin, and Putin has not yet said that Russia is joining. They will negotiate as to what the mission of this organization would be, what its limitations would be. The Russians will not accept it being a replacement for the United Nations, no way. But at the same time, it seems like Putin wants to use it for his own purposes, and that is to break the isolation that the Western powers wanted to put Russia into. This is his chance to break out of that isolation and to also unfreeze Russian funds, which he proposed that $1 billion of those frozen Russian funds in the United States be used as reconstruction for Ukraine. That is a message to many. On the one hand, that there will be a Ukraine that could be reconstructed. That means there's a limit to what the Russians want. On the other hand, it is also a hint that Russian frozen funds are Russian, both those in the United States and those in Europe. And therefore, von der Leyen's plans to permanently freeze or confiscate Russian funds will run into an opposition not just of Putin, but perhaps of Trump as well. And from that point of view, this is a very clever move by President Putin. And finally, let me conclude by saying that what we see here is perhaps a beginning of what I talked about exactly a year ago, a beginning of a new multi-centered world that could be called Three Kings, which would be Trump, Putin, and Xi of China. But that would be for a new and separate discussion. I want to remind you, please, to read my book From Lenin to Putin, and also be aware that I have many other playlists, not only issues of contemporary politics with Dr. Brovkin, but also post-Soviet history, Russian history, European history, and personal narratives about my life. So I invite you to join in, and I will see you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.